Here we are in one of my favorite periods, the Baroque. So, what we need to understand is that by this point, the race is on for many different things. Knowledge, the new land of resources there, the changing hand of power. The Netherlands, all of these are monumental points that shaped the art of that time. Whether it was the strong, resounding influence of the church in Spain, empiricism, the right of woman, there was in this period an incredible swing between the different styles and influences that kind of resonated from that Renaissance, and as well the revival of those classical things. So first off, let's understand what the Baroque style is about. Obviously the Mannerists were lively, asymmetrical, they had all that kind of confusion. The Baroque, much more different. More energetic, but more serious. Whereas the Mannerist was kind of casual, the Baroque was serious, dynamic, much more energetic, and Baroque originally was an insulting term. What I want you to think about is this. Most paintings were a window to a moment. Most works of art at this point, at least when we look at painting or drawings, it was, before this, a window. What the Baroque artists sought to do was break the fourth wall. So what is the fourth wall? The fourth wall is that window between us and them. And in Baroque art, they sought to engage us, either indirectly with blood spraying towards us, by tipping cups open, by looking directly at us and seeming to invite us into the painting. The emotional lack of restraint, the theatricality and the drama of it all. The idea of breaking the fourth wall is only made more dramatic by the lighting, that the heavy chiaroscuro that the Baroque style is known for. Now, this energy, this emotion, this exuberance can be seen in architecture. Some might say that Baroque architecture is rather ornate. Here we can see the movement in Bernini's work, the Baldacchino. What I want you to think about more, though, is that space on the right. Think about what I've said before with architecture being a psychological warfare. They're shaping the space and how you react in and with the space. Before this, St. Peter's was simply, narthex, nave, the structure itself. This is the building that Michelangelo helped to renovate. But then they wanted to add more to it. They wanted to add, an open space where people could gather. What do? They take columns and create two long rows. The columns together are not a solid wall. They're an open space, so like the Forum of old, people could come and go as needed, but still felt like they were contained in a space. And so these two large curving colonnades seem to contain the people before the church. The priest can come forward, call forth to his flock, and they look up, quite literally. Remember, this is below the church, this is higher up. They look up to the leader and the voice, and the arms of the church, the arms of the Holy Mother seem to embrace its flock once again. Now, did buildings really do this before? Not quite. Is that to say round buildings or round spaces are an innovative thing? No. What I'm trying to say is how they work with the viewer, how the experience is changed. Curving elements is not something we saw in Renaissance or even classical architecture. When we look at this facade, those curving in and out concave, convex elements, that is not at all Renaissance. It's engaging, it's welcoming at the same time, and it's more lively than anything we saw before. Is that the status quo now? Obviously not. France did not want all of that drama and that energy that the Italians were slobbering, well, slobbering is kind of an exaggeration, were so excited for. France wanted that order, that symmetry, to help brand the king. Louis XIV wanted to brand his rule, and art was a great way to do that. Looking at this building, you see those classical elements of harmonious proportions, the symmetry, the strong classical base. And this only serves to reinforce the order that comes under Louis XIV. He brings order to his empire. Now, it's not just this building, but rather a number of buildings, but more importantly, the big contribution here is the Academy. Under the tutelage of the organizers of the Academy, the French Academy provided a place to train French artists and tell them this is what art was. This is what art could be. This is how art was to be made. Like Charlemagne trained his people under the tutelage of the curriculum that was used in the monastery. You guys remember that? The monastery was training people under the guise of the church, but also kind of pushing the agenda of Charlemagne. Here we have Louis pushing forth, under the people that were heading the academy, that were under the rule of Louis, they can push forth the Louis message. Now this space is, of course, one of the rooms that helped to make him, helped to reinforce that idea of the golden grand sun king that Louis was. He understood the power of images. He understood the power of, let's say, public relations, to use a more modern term. By presenting this grandeur, he could reinforce that, as well as, not just the order, not just the symbol and organization, but by covering it, by presenting it in such a manner, it only helps to drive home that message of his absolute rule. Now in England, we saw something else entirely different. We're only going to look very briefly at one of Christopher Wren's great buildings, and in this we see not just the Renaissance symmetry, not just the Baroque, but we see a blending of all of it. Earlier on in class, I might have told you how now that there's no, between now and then, there's no great dark period where our knowledge is lost. So now, artists, architects, craftsmen can draw upon all those previous styles, blend them together, and represent them. That is exactly what Christopher Wren does, taking the twin towers of the Gothic period with the gabled roof, putting it on top of this strong classical base. This is all incredibly Baroque, blending those different regional styles as well as artistic styles. This is the world of architecture in brief. Exuberance, engaging, dynamic, but in France, classical, elegant, purely classical for political gain, for political power. Looking at sculpture, we go to Bernini. Bernini, without a doubt, in this one painting, once again, we go back to David, and here we don't have a sassy David, a feminine David, or even a childlike David. We have a strong, determined David that is diagonal, energetic, caught in motion. He has dropped his armor aside and is ready to lay the eternal smackdown on Goliath. Looking up close in his face, and I would encourage you to look up close, you can see that strong determination, that energy that, is in the moment. Let's go back to the slide. There we are. You can see the determination in his face. You can see the energy in his muscles, the veins which are bulging, or the arteries, what have you. He has dropped it down, and when I say it engages the space, look at him. He's actually even coming off the pedestal. Parts of the sculpture are coming off the pedestal like he's ready to step off and engage or break that fourth wall. This is, by no stretch, Bernini's greatest work. Bernini's greatest work is considered by many to be in that top 20 of the greatest works of all time. It is known as The Ecstasy of St. Teresa. Now here you see it from afar. You see this grandiose, this opulent, gorgeous space. You see the fake wings to the sides with small sculptures of the patrons that had the work made. And think about it, people will be coming right up to this little rail. They will kneel, they will pray, they will worship and adore this sculpture about the inspiration of the Lord, and they will see from below the ecstasy. This is the ecstasy of St. Teresa, which is, for the most part, a sculpture in 3 parts. You have St. Teresa, who is on the rocks, surrounded by these luxurious folds of cloth. She seems to be caught in something that borders the line between pain and pleasure. You have the contrast of the folds of fabric with the rough, unhewn rock. You have that contrasted with the light of the Lord, these golden brass rods which come down. And before her is an angel which appears to be ready to pierce her with an arrow. Looking closely at Teresa's face, you see that her mouth is open, her eyes are kind of glassy or glazed. I mean, she could be blazed, she could be drunk, she could be in pain. Some say that she is in the middle of an orgasm, hence the ecstasy, the divine supreme ecstasy of the love of the light of the Lord. The angel, in contrast, is very much in the moment, acknowledging Teresa, and very much in the moment with his task. Having seen this work and seen some of the grandmothers or people that look at it, they cannot deny the presence of this sculpture. When they see it, well, I've seen a couple of women fan themselves. It's a rather charged work. It is full of strong feeling, and it, again, like David, kind of pours out over its pedestal, seeming to carry over as if she's going to fall towards us and we need to catch her. That is part of the dynamic, expressive, and incredible qualities of Bernini in this Baroque period. Now, moving to painting, we can talk about briefly an artist that I would, if given a chance, spend an entire semester talking about. He's one of my favorite artists of all time and really influenced me as an artist. That is Caravaggio. Caravaggio was a rock star. He was a scoundrel. He was a murderer. He is known to have killed at least 2 different people. And he was also wanted by the Pope. I could tell you stories about how he painted a self-portrait of himself as John the Baptist. I could tell you about his lovers. This boy was in fact one of his lovers. Caravaggio was gay, and he was always on the move. But all of this pales in comparison to his great works. See, what Caravaggio is doing is continuing that tradition of strong chiaroscuro. He's breaking the fourth wall here by offering the boy. The boy holds the basket of fruit for consumption. But look at the way the boy is looking at you. Look at the way the boy is bringing his arm around, almost as if he's saying, would you like this, or would you like me, or would you like all of this? He breaks the fourth wall and takes away any kind of background or context, creating this very dramatic, like a backdrop in a play, background. The 2 dark shadows, could they be wings? Is he a dark angel, or is it simply ambiguous shadows? Now, chiaroscuro does play a strong role here, but it's not the pinnacle of his use of chiaroscuro. The pinnacle of that would be tenebrism, where he turns that volume or turns that contrast as high up as possible, creating an incredibly dramatic space. One of the other things that gave him such a bad reputation was his models. And I'm not talking about homosexual models, but rather his choice of models for these incredible paintings of faith. You see, Caravaggio would use homeless people, prostitutes, drunks, addicts, anyone he could find to model for him. So these holiest of holy people were in fact, people that we might not consider with such a position. That gave him a bad reputation, but let's get back to the actual painting. The contrast here, turned up, I'm not trying to use the party phrase. I mean, he really has. He has used that clever tool in the Christian language of light equaling goodness. Here, light falls upon Matthew, falls upon those that acknowledge the Lord, whereas those that do not acknowledge the Lord are in shadow. So, shadow perhaps equaling sin, shadow equaling ignorance. The normal halo of the Lord is discarded for a more subtle, thin band of gold. We'll see that later in Rembrandt's work as well. I'm going to zoom in just a bit to make it a little easier. You can see the thin band of gold. You can see how it just kind of barely breaches that shadow and light. Something else that Caravaggio is doing here is something that we saw Veronese do, and that was put these religious stories in a modern context. The same way I told you about how I'd like to set the Last Supper in a sports bar and let Judas be texting someone, here they're wearing the clothing of their time. Whereas Christ, and his servant here, wears a more classical, timeless piece of clothing. And so it creates a contrast as well, as if he is leaving his sinful world and he's going to don the robes of his faith and, take on a more classical, pure life. Now that is Caravaggio. So profound was his contributions that he even had followers. Leonardo didn't have followers, but Caravaggio did. They were called the Caravaggisti. The Caravaggisti were followers of Caravaggio. They practiced the tenebrism. They sought to create that strong, dynamic lighting, the chiaroscuro that engaged the viewer with this very intimate, intense scene. Perhaps his greatest follower was Gentileschi, a woman who had to endure quite an ordeal to leave her husband. If you read the book, you'll read about how this woman wanted a divorce and she had to have her thumbs put to the screws. And then under the pain of torture, she had to demand a divorce. After leaving her husband, she began to paint. And Gentileschi is known for painting images of strong women. Here we see Judith beheading Holofernes. Holofernes, this great general ready to attack a city in Jerusalem. Judith is aware of Holofernes' might and the might of his army, so she sneaks into his camp, gets him drunk, seduces him, and as he is drunk and weakened, with the help of her servant, she lops his head off, and the streams of blood seem to jump towards us as she firmly and decisively cuts his head off. She puts the head in a bag, carries it back to the city, and the army is ready to storm the city. She walks out to the front, holds his head high. The army turns away. Judith forever known as a hero. And the story rings on. That is Baroque painting in Italy. Whereas we also have Baroque fresco. This work here gives us that emotion, that energy, that breaking from the fourth wall as the damned and the blessed alike break forth from that traditional space in the ceiling. We have a grisaille as well surrounding the main painting, and the light of the Lord, not just the light, but the Word of God, the Tetragrammaton itself serves as the focal point, and if you give me just a moment, there it is. The Tetragrammaton being, of course, the four-letter name of the Lord. It serves as the focal point and the light source and the vanishing point for everything throughout the painting, which serves to create a really strong message for this piece. That is Italy. Then we move north to Holland, and we find perhaps one of the greatest masters from Holland, and that is Rembrandt. Rembrandt changed the game forevermore in that he was more than just an artist. Obviously, artists at this point became businessmen, became rock stars. Sorry about that. Had to go kiss my daughter goodnight, tell her story. Try to. Anyway, Rembrandt. What are we saying here? Obviously, Rembrandt changed the scene. He was more of a businessman. He saw the potential for money. And, there is that. Let's look at his work. We have him breaking the fourth wall. The man comes around, the water that comes out, the chiaroscuro, the timeless message of you have been weighed, measured, and found wanting. The message, the writing is on the wall. That no matter all your wealth, no matter all the swagger and bling and friends and girlfriends and sycophants, no matter all of that, it doesn't matter because in the light of the Lord, it's meaningless. A strong message, a strong story. Perhaps one of his more famous pieces, The Night Watch, here shows that diagonal movement throughout. Uh, the man here breaks the fourth wall again as he seems to invite and call to you to join them. Join them in the watch. From the man, you have diagonal movement throughout the different spears and muskets, even a self-portrait of Rembrandt here in the middle. I'll show you where he is. He's right there, a rather young Rembrandt, with the woman here showing the bird and the symbol of the order, which is here. A little hard to see here, but all throughout there's this use, like Peter Bruegel, one of his artistic forefathers. The red carries us also throughout the image, very cleverly from small piece to small piece here and there. So you have the chiaroscuro, you have the diagonal movement, you have the energy, and you have the expression. Does this look like it was made for a church? Not at all. Does this look like it was made for a bedroom? Not at all. This was something made for an entire militia. So in their great feast hall you would find it. Now this next part of Rembrandt's work, I've devoted five slides to Rembrandt that should tell you the importance, the scope, the magnitude of his genius. This is a simple self-portrait, but is it really that simple? What I want you to do is look at what's happening there in that face. Okay, he looks surprised. He's got these short, sharp, quick staccato stabs of lines going all over the place. Does it look like he's surprised? I would say so. So this is, of course, a young Rembrandt that takes chances, is really trying to keep it punk rock, keep it real. This is him 1630. So obviously, he's made some money, he's done well for himself, and here he draws himself or engraves himself again. Compare it with this self-portrait. He's gotten a little older, he's gotten some nicer clothing. He doesn't have to be all excited and up in your face. He's simply just sitting there like, yo. Compare that now with the final self-portrait of this PowerPoint, St. Paul. So from 1630, 1639, 61. These are three very different self-portraits, but what is the same? What stays throughout the work? I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it is his eyes, his glance. In each of these pieces, there's still that same fire, that same desire to learn, to see. There's a knowing in that look. To better understand and appreciate this work, I challenge you, I dare you, I urge you to go home. Find some pictures of you when you were 5, maybe when you were 10, then when you were 18. Are you still the same person? What has changed? Why are you not happy anymore? Why are you not sad? What is the difference between those different phases? To better understand, or if not appreciate, the work of Rembrandt, especially in his self-portraits, look to yourself and look at those pictures of yourself. This was a man who was prolific in his study of self-portrait, perhaps as practice for these bigger pieces, or simply as a way to understand himself. We don't quite know specifically why he made so many self-portraits. And it wasn't just these three. I mean, we're talking double to triple digits in terms of self-portraits that we know of. So again, I challenge you, look at pictures of yourself. Look at yourself when you were young, compare them with who you are now, and ask yourself, are those the same eyes of who I am? What has changed? Think about it, okay? and hopefully you can gain a better understanding, if not also a better appreciation of the self-portrait experience and the man that was Rembrandt. Moving on from Rembrandt, but staying in Holland, we have Frans Hals. And this is a really interesting painting because there's a tight area and then a very loose area. And then what is a cavalier? Well, a cavalier is typically a soldier on a horse. Not cavalry, but cavalry. It's actually one of my pet peeves when people mistake those two. A cavalier is a soldier. And so what does he do? He's got his money, he's done some fighting, he goes and has a portrait made. The Laughing Cavalier. He looks rather proud, doesn't he? He's got that swagger to him of, here's my sword, here's my fine clothes. The background is really more of an afterthought as parts of it are transparent. We can see this is actually the edges of the piece. It was made in 1624. You got it right there. And what does it say about him? Nothing much more than, here I am, look at me, I'm a boss. Now what I meant by tight and loose, compare if you would the brush strokes in the face. Pretty tight, pretty accurate, but when we compare with parts of the clothing, the background, the clothing is much more quick, it's much more loose, and you can see that here in the brush strokes around the sash and his tunic or shirt. Obviously there's a lot of detail here in the kind of thing that goes around his neck. I don't know what that is, and I'm sorry, I always forget. The brush stroke is rather loose. The brush strokes are rather loose around the negative space, that space around him. It's just, quick little lines. There's not much real detail into that. Hals took time to show the finery, just how expensive his clothing is. But there's this really interesting play between the tight and the loose areas. Quick, dynamic. And again, because he's looking right at you, he breaks that fourth wall. Now we're going to look at another painting of cavaliers, but it's a very different cavalier, and it's probably a cavalier that you can identify more with. That is the gay cavalier. Now gay is not homosexual, rather gay means happy, and here we have two cavaliers that are obviously turning it up or turning it down, but there's a message here. A strong message if you give it time and think about it. You have one guy that's standing up. I'm just trying to make that gray background. There we go. You have the guy standing up. He's got a tankard that's turned upside down. He's got a pipe in hand. He's smiling. He's obviously finished his pint. While the other guy is sitting down drinking an entire gourd of liquor. And then, of course, in the background, you got this guy, this skeleton, holding a skull, holding a candle, and an hourglass. You don't have to be a rocket surgeon to understand that that is death. So what is the message of this work? Well, if you think about it, what are they? They're cavaliers, they're soldiers. What do soldiers do when they're not fighting? Well, they train, and they enjoy life. Obviously, they get a little R&R and they get a place and they go party. They take some of their hard-earned money and try to enjoy themselves. And it reinforces that idea that eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may die. And with death there, he serves as a strong, sobering memento mori, that reminder of death. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may die. But there is another message here. If you just think about what I might have mentioned in the High North chapter, think that in the North they favor symbolism, they favor that strong meaning and trying to tell stories, tell tales, tell morals. What's happening here? This guy's clearly the veteran. He's partying effortlessly. He's just, kicking it. This guy's eyes are wide open. Both of his hands are on the gourd. He's really trying hard to drink, to not, puke like a freshman. It's that very timeless thing. Drink, 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 drink. But there's something else happening. He's wearing red. He's wearing blue. If you remember from the High North chapter, red equated more sin. So this is the more sinful of the Cavaliers. He has done more, he has sinned more, and he seems to egg him on to drink, 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 drink. Whereas he, on the whole, is fairly pure and fairly ignorant. But notice what color is his coat. Perhaps if he survives this drink, if he survives the next month or the next year, perhaps he will be wearing all red. Do you pick up what I'm laying down here? Not only is it eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may die, but there's this idea of sin, ignorance, and that reminder of death. Now you see two legs for the stool, the other leg is there. Some people ask me, like, what is he sitting on? Well, it's actually a stool. And that's completely different and it's off topic, but I wanted to bring it up before I forgot. That is the gay cavalier. Moving on, we move to another of the great masters of Holland. He gets 2 slides. Pretty profound artist. That is Jan Vermeer. Vermeer is known as a true master of light. Some of you might have heard of Thomas Kinkade, and he's claimed to be a master of light, but let me tell you something. Thomas Kinkade is Kmart, chump change, bargain basement compared to the light that we see here. When you visit the lecture in class, I'll play a movie trailer for you where a guy creates a machine to try and understand how exact, how sensitive to light, perspective, and just how good Vermeer's eye is. The guy in the documentary claims that Vermeer had to have a camera to be so incredibly accurate in his painting, to be so sensitive to the changes in texture and color, the sunlight going through the paper, the sunlight bouncing off the environment and lighting the parts of the wall from below and around. To capture all of that, he had to have a camera, a computer. He then goes on to make a device which reproduces Vermeer perfectly. So that raises the question, did Vermeer use a computer? Did he have a camera of some kind? It's an interesting discussion. We can see more of Vermeer's talent for texture and light in the view of Delft. We have 3 clear textures being contrasted here, whether it's the soft, incredibly soft clouds versus the city, versus the water and the nuns or the people on the bank of the river. Each of them having careful detail in the light, bathing the city, then shrouded, creating this soft texture all throughout. Even the water has that stillness that is still what we think of as water, with incredible detail that, like that man would try and have you think, only a camera and a computer could capture. We're almost finished with the north, and we look then at Riesdael, who creates a really poignant landscape that also has memento moris. Memento moris were wildly popular in the work of the north. Again, whether it is that symbolism or that rich having a moral to the tale that's told in the painting. The moral here, well, not eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may die, but it reminds us of a passage from Revelation. Over your cities grass will grow. For all of man's accomplishments, whether religious, political, or practical, all of those cities will crumble to dust. The crumbling building here serves as a reminder of the transient nature of man's existence, how man is small before the almighty power of God. Man is made even more small when the shepherd and his friend are contrasted with all of this landscape. So even in landscape, a memento mori can be present. And here again we have the strong lighting, not so much the energy of the Italian Baroque, but this is following in the more northern tradition of Baroque art. One final aspect of Baroque art in the north was the Vanitas still life. Oosterwijk here creates a very simple still life of plants, books, instruments. And throughout the Vanitas, there is that reminder, whether it's the butterfly eating a piece of paper, or in this case, a mouse eating some grain. All the endeavors of man are made small by the fact that it is short-lived. This is but another facet of Baroque art at this time. And we're almost through. At this time, you must remember that man was exploring, expanding, and trading. So, art from the Far East, art from the Near East, art from around the world would come to Europe through these port cities. The designs, the trends, the colors themselves, colors that would be new to Europeans, would make their way and become a part of the European tradition. And on the flip side of that, color, images, techniques from Europe would make their way and permeate the art of the East. We see that here in the blending of chiaroscuro and more flat spaces that we associate with art of the Near East. And we can see the strong border work that influenced the Celts, or rather the monks in Hibernia, with their illuminated manuscripts. If you go to a four-year school, you might find classes that devote entire semesters to non-Western art, art of India, art of Africa, the Americas, Asia, the Pacific. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to cover all of these regions and periods, but there are strong traditions and incredible images worth seeking if you're interested in learning more about those things. So we've gone from Italy to Holland, now to Spain. Very briefly, we finish this chapter with Spain. Again, strong chiaroscuro, diagonal movement, energy, but spirituality is really more contained in Spain. The spirituality is strong, whether it's Saint Serapion or even Venus. Here, the diagonal movement leads us to the symbol of his order as color is drained from his face and made more strong in that simple symbol. Perhaps one of the great artists of Spain at this time, though, is Velázquez. If you watch YouTube videos or hear other speakers, you might hear them pronounce it Velázquez. And that is a result of the dialect of Spanish in which the Z is pronounced like a TH. Lisp is fairly common in that dialect of Spanish. Velázquez here has shown us Venus with a putti, a cherub, but something's not quite right about it. Look at the angle of the mirror. From that angle of the mirror, we wouldn't really see her face. Velázquez has taken artistic license to show us her face. Notice the looseness of the paint. Notice how it breaks the fourth wall in which she is engaging us or acknowledging our presence. And consider, if you will, the transition from that really tight paint, that tight brushwork like this, or the tight brushwork of the north. Compare that, if you will, with this, and you'll see some differences. This is kind of leading into the Baroque. From the Baroque to the Rococo, with its soft textures, pastel colors. This is by no means Velázquez's greatest work. His greatest work, of course, is Las Meninas. And this work is in the top 10 of all the works in the Western world. It is a monumental work. It is very large. It is beautiful, and it also has a self-portrait of Velázquez at work. What is the painting about, though? If you read the chapter, you will know what Las Meninas means, or if you simply flip over to Google Translate, you can find it there. Is the painting about the darling little girl who seems to acknowledge us with little expression? Is it about the man looking back at us? Is it about the artist himself? Here I am, this is my life. I want a beer. Or is it about those people there? Is that a window? No. It is, in fact, a mirror. Velázquez is painting the parents of the child. Perhaps they are the parents, perhaps they're not the parents. But if you think about it, you've got the side lighting from the window here illuminating this space. The light bathes the two people in the mirror. We see the great detail there. We have him with palette and brush in hand with this large painting, and that's almost how big Las Meninas is. I told you, it's monumental. It really, really is. And if you knew your history, you knew your classical history, you would know that these are specific paintings he has put in there. It's not just filler. They have meaning and they have importance for the court and for this work. The servants have been given all as much detail, and we have a real strong attention being given to the textures, and this is leading us into the Rococo period. Now, above all this, whether religious or secular, there is still an interest in the classical, and we see that in the work of Nicolas Poussin. He shows us a classical image that is modern at the same time. He takes those bits of the past, combines it with the present, and tells a tale of Phocion. So, the classical is still lasting, still influencing the artists of this time. And we have several words to be aware of. Burr, calligraphic, dry point, etching. These are all used in etchings and printmaking. Podium and state, not so strong, not so important, not so lasting. Stylus, vanitas, you definitely need to know. You definitely need to know Burr, calligraphic, dry point, etching. You need to know those words because we're going to continue to use them. As always, if you have some questions, please don't hesitate to ask. There's a lot of art. We've got 30 slides here in this chapter. It is a big one, but they're all incredibly important. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know either through email, drop by the office, give me a call, or ask me in class. Thank you very much for your time and kind attention. See you later.